Welcome into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm thrilled that you have chosen to spend this time with me. Before we get started, I want to remind you that I've got a link into the show notes to go over to Grand Magazine. Check out the article that I wrote about Generation X grandfathers. I think you're going to like that, as well as check out some of the past issues. They've had Bruce Springsteen, Pat Benatar, other people talking about not only just what it's like to be a grandparent, but also very important topics concerning grandparenting. I also want to remind you again that we are getting super close to hitting a milestone over on YouTube. And if you haven't done so already, please go over there, like and subscribe to the Cool Grandpa podcast on YouTube. That will help me hit a milestone over there in terms of subscribers or viewers. And then we'll just keep trucking along till we hit the next milestone. So, this week, what I want to do is talk with you about grandfathers being a source of encouragement for grandkids. And I know I've said that before, but this time I want to really dial in on what we can do when it comes to the grandkids being creative in the business sense. I've said many times that grandfathers are not just family historians. We are bridge builders. We help connect generations. We help pass down values. We help shape identities. And today we are going to be talking about something that's really been kind of near and dear to my heart over the last few years. And that's, what do we do when we want to support our grandchildren when they want to strike out on their own, try something new, try something different, take some risks. And so this is what we're going to be talking about. This is kind of another version of a legacy that we can leave. And this legacy is not about money and it's not about possessions, but it's the mindset of an entrepreneur and entrepreneurship. Now, we've had some other guests on, Dan Miller being one of them, where we really dug in and talked about this issue. Before you tune out because you think entrepreneurship is only about starting companies or becoming wealthy, let me explain what I mean. Entrepreneurship, in my view, is really about seeing opportunities where others see problems. It's also about seeing what could be and not what is. It's about being creative. It's looking at what the constraints are, what your assets are, and being able to put those together in a very creative way that adds value to somebody, right? It's about responsibility and resilience and initiative. All these things that are going to serve our grandchildren well when it comes to either going to work for somebody or working for themselves. And then we also want to really be sure that we're instilling with them the willingness to build something meaningful. Again, it's not just like chasing things down, but it's being able to build something meaningful, whether it's to themselves or to other people. And these are all life skills, like I said. And frankly, our world desperately needs more young people who know how to think this way. I think, too, that with the coming of all the technology that we're seeing in the rapid pace of development, and we're seeing and hearing that these jobs are going away and these jobs are going away, that being able to own a set of soft skills that you can take anywhere is really going to serve grandkids well. They are going to have to adapt even faster than what we've had to as far as Generation X and millennials and even the baby boomers. Their economy, what they're going to be in over the next 20, 30, 40 years is going to be something that's going to change so fast. We have no idea what it's going to look like. One of the things that I've learned listening to people like Dan Miller, Dave Ramsey, and David Senra is that entrepreneurship is often caught before it's taught. Now, what that means is that a lot of times kids get an idea in their head, and young adults do. They see something that's inefficient, they see something that could be done better, and then they want to start to fix it, right? They want to start to develop an idea. They want to start to work on a problem that nobody else has been able to really solve, or they're going to do it better than what the current solution is. And children absorb this kind of mindset and this energy from the adults around them, from conversations, from examples, and from encouragement, especially encouragement from the grandfathers and grandmothers, right? Because we are a trusted source. We're somebody that can give them encouragement and somebody that can see. I don't know. I go back to this idea that grandparents really see more strategically, parents see very tactically. And so, as grandparents, we might be able to see that if a grandchild sticks with an idea long enough, that it's going to bear fruit, that this is going to be something worthwhile, where parents might really be concerned about, hey, there's a lot of risk here. It's safer to go work for somebody, it's safer to go to college or trade school or, take a job at the family business, whatever that might be, where grandparents can go, you know what, that grandkid really doesn't have the aptitude or the desire to do that. But if they keep working on their passion, they keep working on what they're working on, they are going to be able to really build a business and do something spectacular. Going back to this again, I think grandfathers are uniquely positioned to help cultivate the mindset because we do have that longer term vision. I think we have seen many of the ups and downs. We have come back ourselves from setbacks, and we've got the view and of time and perspective and patience. And I know, a little bit I'm repeating myself, but it's important that you really understand what you bring to the table and what the value is of being an awesome grandparent. And so we're going to talk today about how we use those gifts of encouragement to really help entrepreneurial grandchildren when it comes for them to start a business, to take a challenge, to want to try something that maybe experts are telling them is not going to work. And one mistake I think we make is defining entrepreneurship too narrowly. When many people hear the word entrepreneur, they picture Silicon Valley startups or Shark Tank pitches, or even if we go back to the 19th century, railroad barons and oil barons and that sort of thing. But entrepreneurship is much deeper than that. A child who organizes a neighborhood basketball tournament is thinking entrepreneurially. They're thinking about what it takes to get people excited about an event, how to organize it, and then how to execute that. A teenager who starts mowing lawns is learning entrepreneurship by walking up and down the sidewalk in the neighborhood with a lawnmower, knocking on doors, asking people if they want their lawn mowed, and then negotiating a price for that lawn mowing service. They're learning that you're going to have a lot of no's and you're going to have some yeses. And if you get a few more yeses than no's, then you are going to be living in the tall cotton. A granddaughter selling handmade jewelry online is learning creativity, marketing, customer service, and resilience. And just a little side note here, I recently volunteered at the DECA National Conference here in Atlanta. And one of the projects that I was judging was a young woman who was setting up, for real life too, her own online jewelry store where she was selling into gift shops that might be located along beachfront areas. And she's living in Michigan. So she's a long way from any beach that you might think about, whether it's the Gulf Coast, Southern California, the Oregon coast, New England, the Jersey Shore, or Myrtle Beach, right? She's in Michigan, but she's going through and making all this jewelry. And then she is selling as a high school student all this jewelry out to these little gift shops that are going to resell it to all the tourists that come by. So entrepreneurship is really getting into the habit and the mindset of creating value. And that's important. If we only celebrate traditional academic successes, we may inadvertently discourage kids who are wired differently. I mean, how many times have you heard the story about Edison being sent home with a note saying, "Your kid is unteachable. Please don't have him come back to school." And then mom homeschools him and he becomes one of the best entrepreneurs and inventors that the United States has ever known. We've all are wired a little bit differently, and entrepreneurs especially. Sometimes some of the traditional ways and paths forward for children to young adults to adults is not what these kids, for lack of a better word, are really meant for. Some grandchildren are builders and some are dreamers and some are creators. You know, all these things are descriptions of what an entrepreneur is. And even some are natural leaders. One of the things that can sometimes happen is that entrepreneurs need that person to come in who's the leader, who's the organizers. But a lot of entrepreneurs just hate sitting still. They don't want to be confined. They want to be dreaming, they want to be doing. And instead of trying to force them to into neat little boxes, maybe our role as grandfathers is to help them discover what they are uniquely built to create. One of the themes that you hear repeatedly in these stories highlighted by David Senra in his podcast Founders, and it's one that I've started listening to over the last 6 to 8 months. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Is that many founders were encouraged early by at least one adult who believed in them before the world did. And in fact, David goes in to talk about Michael Dell's life. And Michael Dell's parents wanted him to really go to med school to kind of be on that safe, secure route. Michael Dell's grandfather, when there was a little bit of a tension or rift between Michael and his parents, the grandfather came through, looked at what Michael was doing, and then basically just kind of grinned and slapped him on the back and said, "Hey, you got yourself a company going. You've got yourself a business. You're doing it," in other words. And that bit of encouragement really kind of helped keep Michael going on the path of building Dell as we know it. So, you know, sometimes those adults, like I said, are coaches and parents. They might be teachers, and sometimes they're grandparents. And I think grandparents can speak uniquely into the hearts of those grandchildren, whether it's a grandson or granddaughter. Because if we've been lucky enough, we built up a lot of emotional credit with those grandkids through our relationship building with them, that we are able to, you know, point out some of the things that are going well and maybe some of the challenges that they don't see yet just because they don't have the experience. So I think some of the things that we can say to the grandchildren, like, I think you've got something special there. That sentence by itself can send an echo into a child's mind for decades. It can also keep them going and dreaming when the so called experts, like I was talking about, tell them it won't work. One of the biggest things that these kids who are on an entrepreneur track or trying something new, they need to stop listening to experts. Experts don't build things, experts just tell you how it's not going to work. So, one of the greatest gifts that we can give entrepreneurial grandchildren is that permission to experiment. I think kids today often feel enormous pressure to get everything just right immediately. They've got pressure, both internal and external, to get the best grades, to try their absolute best. And if they don't make it, then there's all sorts of workarounds. You know, we hear about these snowplow parents that will come in and yell and scream and holler at teachers because a kid got a B instead of an A. And the kids see that stuff. And there's that pressure internally just to really get everything right. And I believe that grandparents, because we've seen ups and downs, because of our unique position, we can help the kids see that they don't always have to be right. If they make non-fatal errors, it's not the end of the world. And I really believe that entrepreneurship requires failure, and lots of it. A lot of times you're going to hear from people in business that you want to fail fast and fail often so that you can get to the right solution. And grandfathers can really help normalize that reality and that mindset. We can tell stories about our own mistakes, our own business failures, our own bad ideas, jobs that didn't work out. And we can also talk to them about the risks that taught us those lessons. as well as what we've seen work in other businesses and what didn't. We've got that perspective of seeing how Sears and J.C. Penney's and Kmart's and all these companies that I think we grew up with, how they took missteps and didn't listen to people and then ultimately failed. And we've got the ability to talk to them and really review and dig in. What did the founders of these companies do right? And then what are some of the mistakes? And then how did they correct for the mistakes if they were able to? And so being able to share that information without putting additional pressures on the grandkids, I think really adds a lot to their own journey. We have the opportunity to be vulnerable with them, especially when we're telling personal details. Maybe we had a small business that didn't work out. Maybe we told the boss to go stick it where the sun doesn't shine, and then that didn't end up well for us. Maybe some of those things that we did and we have to take ownership for, when we share that with the grandchildren, that becomes even a closer bond because we're willing to be vulnerable, but we're using it in that space of helping to encourage them to keep moving forward with whatever their idea, whatever that they're working on, but also keep an eye out for not repeating some of the mistakes that maybe we did. Because I think our grandchildren need to understand that successful people are rarely people who avoided failure. Almost every single founder had failures at some point. And again, hopefully they're non-fatal errors. And then the ones that are fatal errors and they lost a business, they had to shut things down, they had to pivot. We can learn and we can tell our grandchildren about that. So if they have a failure, if they have a setback, if their idea doesn't go anywhere, they're able to pivot. They know that there's going to be another opportunity. They know that with the support of their grandfather, they're going to be able to make it through. And so that's where I think that idea of being able to be vulnerable and share those stories is important. Now, Dave Ramsey often talks about how his early bankruptcy became one of the most defining educational moments in his life. If you don't know about Dave Ramsey, he was a young guy that had a lot of real estate that was highly leveraged. And through no fault of his own, a number of banks were acquired. And as they were being acquired, people in those banks were calling in the loans that they had outstanding to him. And it ended up taking him into bankruptcy. And what Dave Ramsey ended up doing was pivoting and realizing how dangerous being in debt can be. And so he's then dedicated his life to helping people understand debt, get out of debt. But without that failure of his real estate business first, he never would have pivoted over to become what he's become. And that's entrepreneurship. It's not perfection, it's resilience. When grandchildren feel emotionally safe around us, they're more likely to share their ideas with us. And that's what we want, right? We want to be on the front porch when a young granddaughter, young grandson comes up and says, "Hey, I've got an idea for this." And they want to run it by us. They want us to help brainstorm. They want us to buy in. They want that support. And when they share those ideas, we should resist the temptation to immediately critique them or become the so-called experts that I was talking about, the ones that say, "Oh, you can't do it." So instead of saying that probably won't work, maybe we start asking open-ended questions to help prompt them to think. Maybe we ask, what would happen if you tried it? Or how could you test that idea? Entrepreneurship grows in environments where curiosity is protected and it's really fostered, and people are asking those open-ended questions, and you're trying and you're failing fast and you're learning and you're iterating. And grandfathers can be guardians and gardeners of that curiosity. We can be the ones that sit there and can then start to engage, whether it's text or phone calls or whatever, or introductions to people, right? We can help them really start to branch out and really start to explore their ideas and we can be there to really support them that way. One thing that Dan Miller emphasized for years was helping people discover meaningful work connected to their strengths and their passions. And I had Dan Miller on the program before. That was episode 48. And if you know Dan Miller, he wrote the book 48 Days to the Work You Love. And I'll put a link to that conversation because we specifically were talking about how grandfathers can nurture grandchildren to become entrepreneurs, how we can nurture them to be creative. So I'm going to put that link into the show notes. So be sure to check that one out. That's a fun conversation. And I think that if we can help grandchildren explore that mindset of an entrepreneur earlier in life by not forcing careers onto them, but helping them build small things, very small things. Like we said, maybe it's a lemonade stand, maybe it's a lawn business. Maybe it's dog walking service or even a YouTube channel where they unpack, I don't know, stuff they get off of Amazon. I never knew that was a thing until students in my class started talking to me about it and started showing me. And then I'm just sitting there going, wait a second, it's a kid unwrapping a box that came from Amazon and showing us this toy. Like, I don't get it, but that's just part of that new economy. That's just part of what's going on, right? Is that it going to YouTube, but going to it kind of wide open. But we can also help them with a craft table at a local market. I think one of Dan's grandkids was doing face painting at local markets and evidently was making a killing just painting like, a cat face or butterflies or whatever on people's faces. One of the things too that kids can do very easily is just create an online store. A lot of successful stores out there have gone to Goodwill, have gone to local thrift stores, turned around and put those items up for sale on various websites, and people have made good money for it. So there's all sorts of things. And the point is that the size isn't what you're looking for when we're supporting the grandkids. What we're looking to do is really support the ownership and support the responsibility and support the learning that the grandchildren are getting. And here's where I think grandfathers really become incredibly valuable. We can slow down enough to walk beside them during that process. I think kids want to run faster and young adults, right? They're working all weekend, they're working nights, they're doing whatever they're doing for what they're working on. And we can help walk with them and think through ideas. I think we can ask those open-ended questions, right? Maybe things that haven't hit them yet. We can ask them about, how are they budgeting money? How are they talking to their customers to get feedback about what it is that they're doing? How to handle disappointment. When you've got the best thing in the world and nobody's buying it, how do you navigate through those feelings? And then, of course, how do you celebrate the progress? The experience matters more than the profit with these young entrepreneurs. And it's okay for them to have some setbacks, but it's that experience. It's getting them into that mindset of trying different things, that knowing that maybe whatever makes them different and unique is actually their unique selling proposition or unique selling point, right? How they view things, how they view processes, how they view tools, whatever it is that they're working on, that's what's going to make them different and separate from anybody else that's in that market. Because entrepreneurial thinking develops through action and not lectures. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people talk about going through MBAs and taking entrepreneurial classes, but they're from professors that have never done anything, that never took those risks, that went straight through undergrad to grad school to PhDs to teaching, and they're teaching entrepreneurship, and they may have great information, but it's all theoretical. It hasn't been anything that they've put into practice. And I want to remind you too that many of the world's greatest founders started out with just tiny experiments as children. And that's where we really become invaluable to them. Not because those early projects made them rich, but because those projects taught initiative. Now, What I want to talk about next is teaching character and not just success. And I think this part of our conversation really matters because we don't need more selfish entrepreneurs. And I even hesitate to say that, but I think there's some people out there that have given businessmen and women a really bad name because of some of the actions that they take. And unfortunately, they get the bulk of the press because of what they do. So, as grandparents, we need to help build more ethical minded individuals when it comes to entrepreneurship. We want to help our grandchildren become more servant leaders, more people who create value while caring about people. And I think that we've got an opportunity to connect that entrepreneurship with character. Some of that character includes things like integrity. And how do you work with grandchildren so that they're honest? So that when they give somebody their word, they mean it and they stick by it. And that's integrity. And generosity and humility, responsibility, faithfulness, kindness. I mean, heck, that pretty much sounds like the Scout Oath and Law right there, right? We add a couple more things and we've got the whole list. And the reason we want to do this is because eventually our grandchildren will realize that success alone doesn't satisfy the soul. How many times have we read and gone through all these different studies about people that are making X amount of money, but are still miserable? They still feel unfulfilled, even though from the outside looking in, it seems like they should be nothing but happy. And being able to teach grandchildren and help them realize that just business success itself doesn't satisfy the soul, but it's the journey, right? It's the building up of things, it's the building up of a team, it's a building up of having a product or service that serves the community well. A business without character eventually collapses from the inside. And I think that's why we see so many of these businesses that don't last more than 30 years. And going back to Dave Ramsey, he often talks about leadership as stewardship. And that idea matters. And I really like that because as you build something, as it starts to get momentum, you're really becoming a steward of that product, service, whatever it is that you're doing, and whatever it is that a group of people are doing. And so entrepreneurship should never simply become, how do I make money? It should be, how do I serve people well? How do the products that I make people's lives easier? Or how do we improve what people are already doing? That mindset really changes everything. A grandfather can help grandchildren understand that money is a tool, it's not an identity. And it's the purpose that matters more than the applause. One of the recurring themes in founder stories is that sustainable success usually comes from an obsession with serving people exceptionally well. And that serving people could be building the best vacuum cleaner you can, it could be building the best stores that you can, it could be building the best restaurant that you can, it could be building the best media outlet that you can. Whatever that is, being able to have that as your goal is serving people exceptionally well. It's not chasing the fame, it's not chasing the status, it's not chasing shortcuts. And I think today, a lot of our kids, as they're growing up, that's what they see. They see the fame, they see the status, they see people talking about how you hack this and hack that. And it's all about really getting in and having I don't know what the shortcut, right? And it's the shortcuts and it's the inauthenticity that really, I think, hurts young entrepreneurs in the long run. So grandfathers, get in there. We can reinforce those values in a quiet but powerful way. The next part is I want to talk about modeling lifelong curiosity. You don't have to own a business to encourage an entrepreneurial grandchild. I mean, I really don't own a business. I've got a podcast, I've got a few other things going on, but I don't have a corner store. I don't have those things, but you don't need that. You simply need that curiosity. You need to ask questions and read books. You need to talk to your people in your social network, whether it's at a concert, whether it's somewhere else, and you're running ideas and you're asking questions and you're learning those new skills and talking about new ideas. That's what we model for the grandchildren, that growing never stops. And I think one of the most powerful things that we can model is that intellectual curiosity later in life. I mean, it's one thing to be 20 something years old and you just get turned on to start reading Fortune magazine and the Wall Street Journal and whatever journals and magazines and online blogs and things. It's another thing that when we're older and to our grandkids, we're older than dirt, that we're still showing them that we're curious, that we're still learning. And when grandchildren see us still learning, still reading, still building, still adapting, it gives them permission to keep doing the same. In fact, it encourages them to keep doing the same. You don't really age out of creativity, and you don't age out of purpose. You don't age out of contribution. So remember that. These are things that we don't age out of, but sometimes I think grandparents can check out of, and that's that creativity, the purpose, and the contribution. And maybe one of the best entrepreneurial lessons we can teach our grandchildren is this: your life is not something you simply consume. It's something you build. You're always building your life. You're always looking for expansion. You're always looking to live life in crescendo. If I can, quote Cynthia Covey Haller about that. And as grandfathers, we may never appear on the cover of business magazines. We may never launch billion-dollar companies, but we can help raise grandchildren who become courageous creators. They become builders. They become the problem solvers, the leaders, the servants. And maybe years from now, one of our grandchildren will launch something into the world that is both meaningful and profitable. And maybe they will create that billion-dollar business. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a local business that just really serves the community well. Maybe they just create a nonprofit, a ministry, an invention, a creative endeavor that includes being in the arts. I mean, being in the arts is very entrepreneurial. Even though you're a painter, a writer, a sculptor, whatever it is, you have to learn how to sell that. So that is definitely something that's entrepreneurial in nature. And maybe somewhere deep in their memory will be the voice of that grandfather, that grandmother who believed in them early on, the grandfather who listened, who encouraged, who challenged, who made them believe that they could build something worthwhile. That's legacy. It's not just leaving something behind, but it's leaving something within those grandchildren. And as we wrap up, I just want to thank you again for joining me today on the Cool Grandpa podcast. As we move forward with leading, learning, and loving, I challenge you to keep building relationships that matter most and leave a truly lasting legacy. And until we meet again next time, remember to stay cool.